So, people always ask me, how do I get a deal in the market? So today what we're really going to be talking about is how you can try to get a deal in this market and add value to an existing property so that in the end you can walk away with a much higher end valued property. So I, about a year and a half ago, purchased a property in the Jones and Girard area. I was very fortunate that I was able to purchase a house in this market in Leslieville, no less, for less than $500,000. It was the property that nobody wanted. It didn't look sexy. It looked kind of gross. It was pink on the outside, pink stucco, actually. And I used this basically in my favor to buy something that was really cheap. What I did was I decided, luckily a good friend of mine was an architect, and what I did was I turned this single unit dwelling into 2 units because I was really looking for another rental property to help bolster my retirement. It's something that I do to help my retirement savings. So what I did with the property was hired an architect, hired a designer, and found contractors to work with me. And basically we built this house from nothing and pretty much rebuilt it from scratch, digging out the basement, ripping down all the walls, putting in new insulation, putting in new kitchens and bathrooms, and putting in kitchens and bathrooms where they really didn't exist before. And that was really a good way to get value out of the property. It took about a year and a half. It was quite a long process, unfortunately, and of course it goes way, way, way over budget. But it also took a while to find tenants once I did get everything built because, of course, as a homeowner, you're under the gun and you want to get the place rented as soon as possible. So I started renting it while it was still under construction. And tons of renters just couldn't see the vision of what they could be living in. From my perspective, I thought, but now they know that the place they're going to be living in is brand spanking new, and they'll be the first people to live there. So why doesn't everybody want to live there? Anyways, it did take a while to find the right tenants because then after I did sort of all my checks, when I go through and find a new tenant, I'm checking their credit report, I'm calling up previous landlords, I'm Googling their names and everything else that I do to make sure that the tenant is right for the property. And I just found that a lot of people weren't great. And I wasn't desperate, so I really wanted to wait for just the right tenants. So I found some great people who've moved into the place right now. And in fact, one of them even made a comment to me, the fact that they had bumped into someone who had applied to be a tenant on the street. And they sort of got a look at that person and said, oh my God, thank God that you didn't pick them to be, my neighbor. And I thought, okay, good. I'm so glad that I did well. So anyways, I've got some great tenants in there right now. And so everything has worked out. I've been able to refinance the property. So I've been able to get an additional mortgage on the place, which is great because that way I can get some of my construction costs out. One of the things I've definitely noticed in order to make money as a real estate investor is that you really have to go and find that diamond in the rough, add value to it, get tenants in it, and then be able to refinance and get some of your property, get some of your money out of the property so that you can therefore put a mortgage on the property. It certainly helps to have an existing principal residence where you can take money out of your existing principal residence. That's how I was able to finance my purchase in the first place, is that my existing principal residence, I've been living in there for many, many years. It's worth double what I paid for it now. So I was able to go to the bank, get it appraised, get the value of that, and be able to take additional mortgage money out of my principal residence and be able to use that to purchase this other investment property. And so now I've just bolstered my retirement. Now the mortgage payments and the property taxes are covered by my new tenants who live in the property. And I was able to take that extra money that I had put out of my house and paid that back down on my house. So I'm back down to a lower mortgage on my principal residence, which is great. But it's certainly one of the things that I've learned is certainly a great way to go about real estate investing and a great way for me to get a deal, and great way for my clients or anybody else out there to get a deal is to really look for that diamond in the rough that needs a little bit of work. I recently helped one of my clients purchase another diamond in the rough property. It was on a street in the Girard, and it's off of Girard in between Greenwood and Coxwell. So great neighborhood. I feel like it's a great up-and-coming neighborhood. You can see along Gerrard, a lot of the storefronts are for sale or for lease. That neighborhood is really changing and turning over. There's some cute coffee shops. There's an Italian/pizza joint in the area, in between some of the Indian restaurants, which is great, adding a little bit more variety to the neighborhood. So I was able to help my client find a place there. And I mean, we had lost out on lots of bidding wars. My client is a first-time home buyer. And luckily, through, I guess, a leap of faith, and I think she trusted me, we were able to find her a house that was listed for $530,000. So my client was able to purchase a place for $530,000 in this market. And this basically just happened in, I guess it was the month of August, really, that she was able to make this purchase. And August is certainly, there are becoming fewer and fewer downtimes to purchase real estate in Toronto. And I would say that August and December are those times when you know that somebody who's on the market in August and December absolutely has to sell. So that's certainly the time to go out and scour and try to get a deal. However, sometimes some sellers can be quite stubborn and they're not willing to give you that deal that you're so looking for. However, we got lucky in that we did have someone who, they were living in the U.S. It was their mother's house. Their mother had moved into a home and the house was sitting vacant, and it needed quite a bit of work. All the flippers were turning away from this house because if they paid what the seller was asking and then they put lots of money into the house, let's say $150,000, $200,000 into the house, once they had to go back and resell it on the market, they wouldn't make any money. So for an end user, it made a little bit more sense. An end user who didn't need to spend $200,000 fixing up the house, but maybe might want to spend $70,000 or $80,000 or $100,000 fixing the house up to get to the standard that they were hoping for. And then that way they could stay there and live in the house. They would still be increasing the value significantly of the house. And at least in the next couple of years, they've gotten the opportunity to move in the house. The great thing about this $530,000 house is that it had a separate entrance in the basement. It was a small basement, however, it was still useful as a basement apartment. You could still create a one-bedroom basement apartment there, which again would really help my client pay the bills in having that extra income coming out of the basement. So she'll be closing on that house soon, and so I'm really excited for her to start her next journey in terms of construction and seeing how that goes forward. Construction sometimes can be a painful process, as I experienced when I purchased my house, as I mentioned, around the corner in the Leslieville area at Jones and Gerrard. It always takes longer than you think. And sometimes when you think something's going to take 3 weeks to finish, it takes 12 weeks to finish. So that's definitely one of the challenges with doing construction. And, once it's said and done, you're happy with the product and everything is great and wonderful. But when you're going through that process, it can be very stressful. So I guess I always remind people to have a grain of salt and their patience with them as well. And oddly enough, I'd say watch a lot of TV. Watch a lot of those flipping shows, the Tarek and Christine, even the Mike Holmes show, because it does actually give you some ideas and some key learnings that you can use when you are working with your contractor on your particular project. The other thing sometimes is to not take the contractor's word 100%. Sometimes it pays off to just get things double checked, just to make sure that you're hearing exactly what should be done, to see if there's any other opinions or other ideas. I was really lucky that I had great sounding board in my stepdad, who's super handy, my friend who's an architect. So they certainly acted as great sounding boards for me, where I could test out ideas and thoughts on them about things I should do and shouldn't do. So that was really lucky, really fortunate that I had that opportunity. But I highly do recommend making sure that you're working with a good, experienced contractor, interior designer, or architect, just to make sure that everything gets done properly and done to code. There are some architects that specialize in the city with working with the building permit department, so that they can really help shepherd that process for you, because I do find that it is quite complicated. I wish the building permit process in Toronto were a lot easier and simpler, but unfortunately they just don't make it very easy. There isn't sort of a clear-cut list of rules written down on paper about every aspect of the building, which would be helpful to contractors and homeowners alike. Instead, you're sort of at the whim of that particular inspector to say whether they like something or they don't like something. And of course, the challenging part of that is that each inspector is different. So one inspector might require things a certain way, but another inspector might require things another way entirely differently, which could cost you more money. So that's certainly the challenge. And then, of course, if the inspectors don't like you, then they can sort of pick on you and make you do extra work and make your contractors do extra work and make you spend extra money that you don't need to spend. So that's certainly the challenge with dealing with building inspectors. They aren't always as helpful as they could be, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. And they don't seem to care very much if people are sort of super over budget or really behind schedule. They're just sort of working to their own beat of their own drum versus anybody else's, which is unfortunate for the building process in Toronto. I think it causes a lot of people to go under the radar and try to build things without getting building permits because the process is so onerous. In fact, that's actually how I started building my place on Jones without building permits, because I just found the process so onerous dealing with these guys. And then, of course, I got caught, and then it took much longer for me to get my building permits. And even after I got my building permits, they certainly weren't very helpful. It's not that after I made my way through the process, I went, oh, wow, I really should have gotten them in the first place. In fact, I was like, oh, this is why I didn't go down this path in the first place, because these guys are not nice and they're not helpful. I hope that that's a process that can be changed in future years with the building permit thing, because I think that a lot of people who go through their experience with doing the building permit the second time around, they tend to go underground. I know some of my clients have done that just because they found the process with the building permits so onerous. It's difficult enough to build and work with a contractor who may or may not be going over budget, but then when you add in working with the building permit process, it can be quite challenging. It's not for the faint of heart, so I certainly don't recommend it to everybody. I would say, make sure you've got your blinders on, your eyes open for what you're getting into, roll up your sleeves, and like I said, make sure you're working with a good contractor who has experience working with the building permit inspectors, so that way at least they know what to expect, because some of the contractors out there certainly do know what to expect with the building permit inspectors, because it's something that they have encountered before themselves. You probably also need to have an engineer on board with whatever you're planning on building as well too. If you're planning on building something that's quite big and involved and it's a big construction project, because some of those building permit inspectors will require you to get engineering letters from an engineer to certify that everything that you've done in your building has been done to code. I call that the CYA letter. So that is the building permit inspector saying that they don't want to take any responsibility for what you're building. So they want to make sure that an engineer has stuck his signature or his insignia, his stamp on a letter to make sure that if anything bad happens, somebody else can get blamed for it, and they can't be. When did we get to this place in the world? But unfortunately, that is what happens when you go through the building process. Anyways, once it's done, it's all great. I'm super happy that I've gone through the process now. My building is built. My tenants have moved in, and now they've just been moving their furniture in and making the place look pretty, which is great. And it's a relief that I've got another property down. I'm up to about 4 properties right now in my real estate investing portfolio. And I sort of debate whether or not it's worth it to get a 5th or not. But for now, I think I'm going to take a break for the next year or so, just to, I guess, sort of rest and make sure everything is going well with my properties before I move on to the next property. I do highly recommend real estate investing for people who are looking to bolster their retirement funds. When we all turn 60 or 65, there's sort of this question of, well, what are you going to do for money? You won't be working, you'll be retired, there won't be any income coming in, and if the stock market crashes when you turn 65, as it did in 2008 for a number of people who had just retired, then what? That's one of the reasons why I believe so strongly in having a real estate portfolio, because I think to myself, if my RSP, if the stock market crashes, when I turn 65 and I want to retire, then all my money is gone. It's evaporated. What I like about the real estate is it's not going to evaporate. I know there's lots of people out there who want to talk about doom and gloom and the market's going to crash, but $1 million house in Toronto is all of a sudden not going to be worth zero, which is exactly what happens with the stock market. That Nortel stock that you bought that you thought was a great deal crashes and becomes zero. So what I like about investing in real estate is that my $1 million house will not be worth zero. It won't even be worth $500,000,